down to Acts 9, the conversion of Saul on the road to Damascus. Acts 9:1. In the meantime, Saul kept up his violent threats of murder against the followers of the Lord. He went to the high priest and asked for letters of introduction to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he should find any followers of the way of the Lord, he would be able to arrest them, both men and women, and bring them back to Jerusalem. As Saul was coming near the city of Damascus, suddenly a light from the sky flashed round him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" "Who are you, Lord?" he asked. "I am Jesus, who you persecute," the voice said. "But get up and go into the city where you will be told what you must do." The men who were traveling with Saul had stopped, not saying a word. They heard the voice, but could not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground and opened his eyes, but could not see a thing. So they took him by the hand and led him into Damascus. For 3 days he was not able to see, and during that time he did not eat or drink anything. This is a great passage that you all know well. It's sort of a purple passage, really. Saul's conversion on the road to Damascus. It's important for lots of things. We know that. Incidentally, I thought it's interesting if you are worried about the security of the church and persecution. Although God allows much persecution, when enough is enough, he said that is enough. Saul never actually got to Damascus to persecute the church. I think that's an important word for us. When he says enough is enough, that is enough. Clearly, it's also important for us because this is the turning point of Saul's life as he's eventually become St. Paul, and all that meant for the Gentiles, for our Bible, for us being here. It's crucial. But it's not a sort of passage that I read straight through and thought, well, I usually feel like that. Because you don't, do you? It's not like that in a common to garden way. We don't identify with him absolutely, and you can't just go off with 3 points from this passage. So it's not that I found anything different, but I just offer you some areas of reflection, really, that you might go and be able to work with. I think the main one interested me was the way that Saul was a man who'd grown up and as a Pharisee and had lived his entire life within that Pharisaic tradition. He would have been, as a boy, sent to a special school. He would have been educated. He would have become very religious. He would have a pattern of life. He would have had a dress code. He would have a dietary code. He would have his whole life would have been growing up within this spiritual, theological, religious setting. It was his career. It was also his calling. And you can see that almost as a sort of I don't know, not a tunnel, but it's a worldview. It's a model of things about how God is, about the way the Messiah will one day come, and what have you. And there's that sense there that this is the way he lives. This is not narrow-minded. He's passionate, enthusiastic about it. But it is a view, it is a theory, it is a model, it is a pattern. And when God meets him on the road, that whole worldview collapses in one go. It's not a detailed issue. The angel does not stand before him and say, "Not Damascus, let's do Samaria." It's not a detailed thing. It's not Damascus, leave it till all the Christians have developed and come out into the open. Then you can go to Damascus and get the whole lot. It's not a matter of tactics. It's a whole worldview collapses around him. All that he thought about God and about how he should be and what he was trying to do and his priorities. Because in fact, as those priorities had been challenged, he'd become more entrenched and become more angry. You'll read in some commentaries that Saul was very nervous and anxious and guilt-ridden, and he was worried that the Christianity was true and he shouldn't have been there with the business with Stephen and the stoning. That is 19th, 20th century psychology. They don't do that in the New Testament. Luke is not interested in that. He's not doubting. He's not worried. He has got not a doubt in the world. He is absolutely clear what he's doing. He's absolutely confident that these people are heretical. These people are speaking against God, against God's righteousness. They are against how Israel should be. He is absolutely right about everything until this comes. The voice and the light, and then he realizes that actually he was wrong about everything. He was wrong about Jesus, he was wrong about the cross, he was wrong about everything that Jesus said, he was wrong about the whole of the Old Testament and how it was leading up to the Messiah. He was wrong about what God wanted. He was wrong about it. He shouldn't have been there going to persecute. He was wrong about it. The whole thing just crumbles around him. I think that's a very interesting model. Because I think that I and you, we lead our lives, not just the whole of our life, but aspects of our life, with models, with worldviews, with working hypotheses, in which we have rules and understandings, and we invest into it. And it may be that God says, it's not right at all. Even in quite small things. Thinking about the way that Saul had gone down this channel of ideas and values and invested his life into it. Our lives are a bit like these big electricity cables. You've got a big cable, and inside, when you cut it, you've got all these other little ones. Well, our lives are made up of all those, our jobs and our health and our hobbies and our habits and our relationships and all those kind of things. Within each tube, if you like, we rattle around and we invest time and money and effort and this morning you'll have dozens of those in what you're doing in your lives, and it may be your whole life, but it's probably more interesting in bits of your life. And within that, Saul was a man who prayed, was a great man of God. You will be doing your Christianity within that. Oh Lord, I pray for this and this and this and this. Help me with that and that. Forgive me for this and this. Within that. What if he says about something, it's not right at all? And the whole thing changes. It's a paradigm shift. I'll give you some examples. As you know, my wife and I help with an allotment. Allotments are great things, not just for growing vegetables, but for producing sermon illustrations. Obviously sometimes better at the latter than the former, actually, but a couple of years ago, somebody said, would you like to have a bit of allotment? So I said, allotment. And then you realise that allotments take on a life of their own. You get down there and there's the digging and there's and you develop, don't you, time and effort and sweat and mud and even money, and there's what you're going to plant and the seeds and all this stuff, and it becomes a whole thing. When you go down there, the time you'll spend, the money you'll spend, is the crop going well, are the bugs eating it, all those things, and you deal with that as an internal economy. It's a whole thing. Is it going well? Oh, well, the parsnips are going well. The raspberries are going well. There's that, or somebody's eating that and they're not getting anything at all. And you get crises, the crises like the wood lice were eating my radishes in the autumn, And you get angry about it, you see. What am I going to do about the wood lice, you see? And then there's friendly neighbours, who actually let their couch grass grow from their allotment into your allotment, and you love them, So you've got a whole thing about time and money and effort, and when anything challenges it, bugs or neighbours or whatever it is, and you build up this, you see. What if God says, what are you doing this allotment for? What if he says, let's not do the allotment? And then you think, well, I'm not then concerned about how the parsnips are doing. I'm not concerned about woodlice anymore. I'm not concerned about any of that really, because I'm not doing allotments. That is a change of worldview. That is a paradigm shift. It's a change of hypothesis, a change of model. It's not just a new insecticide or a new super crop. It's, let's not do this anymore. You're actually wrong about this. And then I'm not angry about anything, and I'm not stressed about anything, and I'm not working, and I'm not investing in it, and I don't go there anymore. You see? Some of you might see that in other parts of your practical lives. And I've known people, I'm sure this is not you, but I've known people who got to clean their house every day. And they're not happy. And they don't meet anybody, and they don't go out. And I'm the most untidy thing when I visit them. What about if God says, just flick it around and do a bit of dusting, get out and do something else? This is not a new sort of wonder floor polish. This is a change of worldview. What does it matter? Wow. Or on a more profound thing, perhaps, the way we make our peace with our married children. You've got various models for that. One model is, I live near my married children, I'm here for them all the time, 24/7, I will babysit, I will do things, I will lend them money, I will go around and help them with this and this and this. And then in that model, how do I survive? How do I get any time to myself? How do I work around the whole thing? I know people like this. I've known people down the years like this. It's a way of doing it. Other people will say, I'm not living within 50 miles of any of my children. I'll see them once a month and they can come and visit me. They've got to get on with it. It's a different model. But then you're saying, when am I going to go and see them? Put it in the diary. And you have these models. What if God says, it's not a good model, is it? Let's do something else. Let's do something else. And it's not, you should see them more often or you should see them less often. It is, let's think about it in a different way. Mind you, Saul is not just concerned with those things that he thought God wanted him to do, like go and persecute Christians. He was wrong about God himself, about what God is like. The non-Christian tends to deal with a model where God is not there, and when challenged with the presence of God, gets very stroppy about it. Because they want, not because they feel threatened, but because they want to reinforce their non-God view. And become more enthusiastic about why God isn't around. And what if God touches them and they say, my gosh, I was fundamentally wrong about this entirely. It wasn't they suddenly learned something about the Old Testament. It wasn't suddenly there was a magic verse. It wasn't something that I said something they'd never thought of before. It was just that God touched them and the penny dropped and they think, the world is full of God. Wow, it's a new ballgame. Or for those of you who are Christians, I've lived with an idea that there are some sins that are unforgivable. So we work around that. We evade them. We don't think about them. We go to counsellors that tell us how to think round them and feel better about it without being forgiven. Or if other people have done that sort of thing to us, we avoid them and organise our families so we don't have to go and see them. And we work with that strategy. What if God says, not something like, oh, this is quite forgivable, but says something really radical like, you know, that was really not important in the first place. What do I want to forgive you for? It actually wasn't wrong. That is a paradigm shift. That is a change. That's what happened to Saul. That's what can happen to us in your whole life, but more specifically in a bit of life. That at the moment you're beavering away in and praying about. At Christmas, we had the grandchildren. One of the things with grandchildren are quite good, I found, are these books where you join up the dots to make a picture. You know, some of you may still be doing that, but it's a big picture, isn't it? It's a big picture, and there's lots of dots. But what I'm saying is sometimes you can't get it, can you? You can't join up the dots, you can't see the picture. That might be where you are in a bit of your life at the moment, that you are saying, God, oh God, I can't join up the dots, where is the picture? And he comes and he says, it's the wrong picture, because it's the wrong page. Turn over the page, and then start joining up different dots. You know? Think about it. And then think, more briefly, so we have this great experience where God does say, actually, you're wrong about all this, where there's the light and the voice and the change. Now, that's not an easy area. How many times have I heard people either say in meetings or even in sermons, well, we can't expect a Damascus Road experience. How many people in their testimony have said, well, of course, I didn't have a Damascus Road experience? As if somehow they don't happen, or you don't want one, or you're not expecting one. First of all, let me just say that there's nothing wrong with having a Damascus Road experience. Don't downgrade it. Don't say, oh, it don't happen anymore. Don't say it doesn't happen anymore. It happens here. Although I haven't had the light and the voice, I and some of you will have had equivalent of that, where God stops you in your tracks. And people who tell you that it doesn't happen or you shouldn't expect it are just justifying themselves. Let's think about Damascus Road experiences. What a matter with a big light and a big voice? It's a good thing. It's a bit scary, but let's not downgrade it, shall we? You certainly know what's happening. But perhaps what's more challenging is that I can't go home to you and say, now we need to prepare for a Damascus Road experience, because clearly he's not prepared for it. An ambush is an ambush. You can't really prepare for an ambush. That's the whole point. He is not seeking the Lord. He's not open to God. He's not praying in the Spirit. He's doing the wrong thing, going in the wrong direction, getting angry about all the wrong things. I can't tell you to go home and be like that in the hope that God will send a light and a voice on you, you see. But if you think about it as one end of a spectrum, it is true that God can break in when you're not listening. And there's many men and women in the Bible, in fact more, who are confronted and their lives changed by God seeking them than by them seeking God. It's not full of monks, the Bible. It's full of people doing something else when God approaches them. But having said that, there's nothing wrong with seeking the Lord. We're told to do that. We're told to pray. The issue is, though, that probably if we are coming before the Lord, he may well do this sort of thing. He may give you a question to an answer you weren't asking and break in. After all, old Saul was a great man of God. It could well have been that on the way to Damascus, he was praying a good Old Testament prayer. Oh Lord, strengthen the arm of your servant to preserve your holiness and destroy these wretched heretics. You can imagine that. Oh Lord. And then God gives him this answer, which he didn't want because it was a different question. And for us, are we open? In this bit of life or that bit of life, oh Lord, help me with the family, help me with the children, help me with my health, help me with my allotment, whatever it is. To suddenly find it, he says, I've got an answer for you to a different question, because actually you're wrong about this. Let's start again. Let's turn the page. Let's do another picture, you see. Lord, I pray that you would give me courage. Now, we're brought up to think that God will give us courage amidst difficulties. What about if God says and reveals that actually, in this case, there is nothing to be frightened of, so you don't need to be courageous? What about if you're asking for guidance to move on? If God says no guidance because there's no need to move. I wasn't thinking about that at all. As I said, what about if you're saying, oh God, forgive me for this? And he says, It's not a problem to me. Mind you, what about if you're saying, oh God, thank you for that tremendous gift, and he says, you shouldn't have had that. Because really you're saying, thank you that I am not as other men, or I am blessed in this kind of, and he says, I'm not happy with that. And you say, oh gosh, I thought you were happy with it. And there is a change. You see? We come this morning, you could say, Lord, here is my prayer, out of my box. He says, let's change the box. It's a new page, new word. Finally, very briefly, you see at the end, what is the aftermath of this change? It begins immediately. It begins in the middle of it, really. He says, Saul, Saul, speaks to him by name. He doesn't say, from heaven, hear you. He says, Saul, it's an important thing. And then he tells him his name, I am Jesus. And as many of you will know, to share a name in the East is an intimate thing. Particularly for God to tell you his name. It's an intimate. So it's immediately intimate. And then there's this bit where Saul, Saul, what are you doing? Why are you persecuting me, you see? This is not I can't read this as why are you persecuting? It's more a matter, so what are you doing here? What is all this about? It's a bit like when God says in Genesis about the Tower of Babel, let's go down to see what they're building. You know, it's that small, we better go down. But they think it's big. That sort of thing. What are you doing? Come on. It's all this anger about, you know. And then when Saul finishes up in a pile of hot dust, God says, well, get up then. It's a bit like Elijah in the wilderness. Get up, he says, and go on now into Damascus, and we'll take it from there. It's a new journey. We're on a new page. That world and that journey ended a minute ago. Now we're on a new journey. And it's a new page and a new beginning. We don't do that anymore because I'm Jesus. You were wrong about Jesus. I'm alive. I'm the Messiah. We are the new Israel. The cross is a sign of power and forgiveness, not of failure. The resurrection came as you didn't believe after the crucifixion. It's a new world. So let's work with the new world, shall we? And it'd be great to feel that this morning you could go home thinking, perhaps in a small bit of life I have a sense of disclosure that God has revealed himself to me and disclosed that I'm wrong. Or disclose I don't need to bother about this. And say, well, let's just do something else. Let's just do something else. Because out of the encounter, there is that disclosure, like dominoes. Oh, Jesus. And then, I was wrong about this, I was wrong about that, I was wrong about that. That could take me in the allotment back to, I was wrong about caterpillars. You know, it's a domino thing. But it could be, I'm wrong about so-and-so at the office, or I'm wrong about that, or I'm wrong about that. Wow, what a release that is. I didn't need to be angry. I didn't need to be guilty. Or I need to take that seriously. But I have a new page on which to join the numbers up. And as Saul goes into Damascus, he has to start joining the numbers up again. But they're different numbers. It's a different world. It's a paradigm shift. And let's pray that this morning we don't just have answers to conventional prayers set out by our needs and our models, but perhaps we have answers to prayers that we haven't prayed and questions we haven't asked and a page we haven't turned. Band are just going to come up and it's interesting that when Saul preaches and writes his letters later, you realize that this experience was not, this is the final missing link in understanding the Old Testament. He's a great theologian. He goes on saying the cross is a scandal. The cross is a scandal. That's the theology of it. But it is life and hope to us. That's at the center of it. So we're going to sing Very straightforward as we come to communion. Thank you for saving me. What can I say?